clipboard slapped down on the front desk. The sound cut through the waiting room like a rifle bolt. An old man in a wet field jacket lifted his head, slow, careful, hands trembling on top of a cane. The young nurse behind the glass laughed out loud. She pointed at the faded patch on his shoulder. She mimicked his stutter. She told the woman next to her he probably could not even remember his own name. 20 veterans in plastic chairs lowered their eyes. The rain hammered the windows. The old man did not speak. He folded his hands on the cane and waited. He had been waiting 6 months for a hearing aid. He had been waiting 53 years for something else. His name was Frank Doyle. Outside, a black SUV pulled into the lot. "Stay with me on this one." The Cleveland VA Medical Center smelled like burnt coffee and old paper that Tuesday morning. The waiting room was a long, narrow box with green carpet worn down to the backing in front of every chair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A television in the corner played a muted weather report nobody was watching. The rain outside was the kind that did not stop, just kept changing speed. Frank Doyle came through the double doors at 7:45. He had walked from the bus stop 2 blocks down. His left knee was bad. His right shoulder was worse. The rain had soaked through the shoulders of his old olive-drab field jacket, the one with the faded 1st Cavalry patch, and a small American flag pin he had carried since 1968. Under the jacket was a flannel shirt buttoned to the throat. In the inside pocket was a brown manila folder, water-stained at the corners, sealed with a rubber band. He took a number from the little plastic machine by the door. The number was 47. He looked up at the board. The board said now serving 12. Frank did not sigh. He did not roll his eyes. He walked to the 3rd row of chairs and lowered himself down slow, holding the cane with both hands, the way a man lowers himself into cold water. He set the folder on his lap. He set his hands on the folder. He waited. The nurse at the intake window was named Crystal Mavers. She was 26. She had been at the VA for 11 months. She wore long acrylic nails painted matte black and a lanyard with 3 different pins on it, none of them service-related. She kept her phone face up on the desk next to her keyboard. Every few minutes, she picked it up and scrolled and laughed at something only she could see. There was another nurse at the 2nd window, an older black woman named Denise Hatcher who had been there 19 years. Denise had the kind of patient that comes from outliving 3 husbands and 2 cancers. Denise saw everything. Denise said nothing yet. At 8:12, Frank's number was not called, but Crystal needed to clear the morning log. She tapped her microphone. The speaker crackled. "Number 47. 47, come to window 1. Frank stood up. His left knee popped audibly. He gripped the cane and shuffled forward. The folder shook in his free hand. "Sir, I need your ID and your appointment card." He set the folder on the counter. He reached into his inside pocket. His hand was trembling. Not from fear. The tremor was a souvenir, the doctors had said. Agent Orange, maybe. Or maybe just 78 years of carrying weight. He fished out a worn leather wallet. He fished out an appointment card. "I am here for the hearing aid fitting." Crystal looked up. She looked at his stutter. She looked at the wet shoulders of his jacket. She looked at the faded patch. Something moved across her face that was not kindness. The hearing aid fitting. She said it back to him slow, drawing out each syllable, leaning into the stutter on purpose. The hearing aid fitting. Got it. Behind Frank, a younger veteran with a prosthetic leg looked up sharp. Denise at window 2 stopped typing. Crystal turned to her monitor. She clicked. She frowned. She clicked again. "Mr. Doyle, I don't see you in the system for today. My appointment is at 8:30. I have the card. Right here." "Yeah, I see your card, sir, but the computer is what matters, and the computer says you don't have an appointment." So she shrugged. Then she did something small and cruel. She turned to Denise and said, just loud enough for the waiting room to hear. Half these guys come in here on the wrong day every week. Bless their hearts. Frank's jaw tightened. He did not raise his voice. I called last Thursday. I spoke to a woman named Mary. She confirmed the appointment. She said 8:30 Tuesday. Well, there's no Mary on this floor, sir. Are you sure it was this VA? Sometimes you guys mix up the buildings. It was this. This building. This window. MMMK. Have a seat. I'll see what I can do. He stood there a second longer. Then he picked up his folder and shuffled back to his chair. Crystal turned to her phone. She typed something. She showed it to the nurse beside her. They both laughed. The veteran with the prosthetic leg leaned over to Frank. You okay, brother? Frank nodded once. He set the folder back on his lap. He set his hands back on the folder. He said very quiet, I am okay. But his hands were shaking harder now. And in the inside pocket of the field jacket, against his ribs, was a thin brown envelope he had not opened in 53 years. At 8:45, Crystal stood up. She stretched. She announced to the room, loud enough for everyone to hear, I'm taking my break. Window 1 is closed for 15 minutes. Denise looked at her. Denise said, Crystal, you just got here at 7:30. Yeah, and I'm tired. Crystal walked past Frank's row. She slowed down. She made a face at the woman beside her, a little wide-eyed look, like she was performing for an audience. She said just loud enough, smells like an old basement in here. Y'all need to crack a window or something. The veteran with the prosthetic leg started to push himself up. Frank reached out and put a hand on the man's forearm. Just laid it there. Slow. Firm. Sit down, son. It is okay. It ain't okay. It is going to be okay. Just sit down. The younger man sat. Frank did not look up. He stared at the folder in his lap. The rain hit the windows harder. Outside in the parking lot, a Cleveland police cruiser had pulled up next to the black SUV. Two officers got out. They walked to the SUV. They did not look angry. They looked careful. Inside, nobody saw any of it yet. Frank Doyle had served 2 tours in Vietnam. The first one was 1966. The second one was 1968. The second one was the one nobody talked about, not even him. The second one was the A Shau Valley. The second one was the reason his hands shook. The second one was the reason he had a brown envelope in his inside pocket. The second one was also the reason a man named James Reese was now the Secretary of Veterans Affairs of the United States. Because in 1968, Frank Doyle had carried a 19-year-old kid named Jimmy Reese 7 miles through the jungle with a sucking chest wound and 3 pieces of shrapnel in his stomach. He had carried him through a riverbed. He had carried him through a tree line. He had carried him into a clearing where a medevac was waiting. He had handed the kid off, and then he had walked back into the trees alone to look for the rest of his squad. And what he found there was the thing he never spoke about, the thing that lived in the brown envelope. Jimmy Reese had survived. Jimmy Reese had become a lawyer, then a state senator, then a congressman, then 6 months ago, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. 2 weeks ago, the Secretary's office had announced a surprise inspection of 3 Midwestern VA facilities, undisclosed dates, no advance warning, to assess wait times and patient treatment. The Cleveland VA was one of the 3. And in his briefcase, on the floor of that black SUV in the parking lot, was a typed letter from one Frank R. Doyle, mailed 11 days earlier, asking the secretary if he remembered a riverbed in 1968. The secretary had remembered. Inside the waiting room, the clock above the intake desk read 9:02. Crystal was still on her break, which had now lasted 20 minutes. Frank's hands had finally stopped shaking. He had closed his eyes. He was not asleep. He was just somewhere else for a moment. The lobby door slid open. 3 men walked in. They walked in the way men walk who have walked into a lot of rooms. The man in the center was tall, gray at the temples, wearing a charcoal suit and a small gold lapel pin in the shape of a five-pointed star. On either side of him were younger men in dark suits with earpieces and the kind of posture that does not relax. The VA hospital director, a balding man named Marcus Friel, came hurrying around the corner. He was sweating through his collar. He had been told 15 minutes ago that the secretary's motorcade had just pulled in. He had not had time to warn anybody. He extended his hand. "Mr. Secretary, sir, what an honor. We were expecting you at the conference room on 3. We have refreshments set up." The secretary did not take his hand. He nodded politely. His eyes were already moving past Marcus Friel. His eyes were scanning the waiting room. "Director Friel, I would like to see the lobby first." Of course. Well, as you can see, we have plenty of seating. Average wait time is 22 minutes, which is well below the national average for. The secretary held up a hand. The hand stopped Marcus Friel mid-sentence. The secretary was looking at row 3. The secretary was looking at an old man in a wet field jacket with a faded 1st Cavalry patch on the shoulder. The secretary's mouth moved. It moved silently at first. Then he said one word out loud, soft almost to himself. "Doyle." Frank Doyle opened his eyes. The two men looked at each other, crossed 30 feet of green carpet. The secretary was 63. Frank was 78. Neither one moved for a long second. Then the secretary walked. He walked past Marcus Friel without a glance. He walked past Denise at window 2. He walked all the way to row 3 and he stopped in front of Frank Doyle, and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs of the United States came to attention and snapped a salute that he held until Frank, with hands shaking and tears already moving down the lines in his face, lifted his right hand from the cane and returned it. The entire waiting room had gone silent. The television in the corner was still playing weather. Outside, the rain kept on. The secretary lowered his hand. He took Frank's hand in both of his. He held it. "Sergeant Doyle, it has been a long time." "Sir." "Jimmy." "It is. It is good to see you, son. It is good to see you alive, Sergeant. If you have made it this far with me, hit that subscribe button. There are a lot more stories like this one, and you are going to want to hear them. Now stay with me, because what happens next is the part that matters." Crystal Mavers came back from her break at that exact moment. She came through the side door behind the intake desk, holding a half-empty iced coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She was laughing at something on the screen. She did not look up. She walked straight to her window and sat down and started to type her password into the computer. Then she felt the silence. She looked up. She saw an old man in a wet field jacket standing now, slow, leaning on the cane, his other hand still inside both hands of a tall, gray-haired man in a charcoal suit. She saw two men in dark suits with earpieces watching everything in the room at once. She saw Marcus Friel, the hospital director, standing 6 feet behind the man in the charcoal suit, staring at her with a look she did not yet understand. She set the iced coffee down. She set the phone down. She heard the man in the charcoal suit say, very clearly to the room, "I am Secretary James Reese. This man saved my life in 1968. He carried me 7 miles. He has been waiting on a hearing aid in this facility for 6 months. I would like to know why." Crystal opened her mouth. She closed it. Nothing came out. Marcus Friel cleared his throat. He started a sentence 3 times. He said, "Mr. Secretary, I assure you that we will look into Mr. Doyle's case immediately. Our intake process is." Director Friel, the secretary's voice was quiet. The quiet was worse than a shout. "I have been standing in this lobby for less than 5 minutes. In those 5 minutes, I have seen one nurse mock a veteran stutter. I have heard her tell another nurse loudly that the man smells like a basement. I have watched her take a 20-minute personal break while veterans waited. And I have watched 20 other veterans in this room keep their eyes on the floor because they have learned that is what survival looks like in this building. Crystal made a small sound at her desk. The secretary did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Marcus Friel. Is this normal? Sir, our staff is. Is this normal? It is not. It is not normal, sir. It is, though. Isn't it? Marcus Friel did not answer. The answer was on his face. The secretary turned to one of the men in the dark suits. Get me the regional director on the phone. Get me the office of the inspector general. And get me every personnel file on every staff member who has worked the lobby of this facility in the last 12 months. Yes, sir. The man stepped away with a phone already at his ear. The secretary turned back to Frank. His voice changed. The hardness left it. The hardness was for the building. The softness was for the man. Sergeant, come with me. We are going to sit somewhere where you do not have to look at a clock. My appointment, sir, I just need the hearing aid. You are going to get the hearing aid, Sergeant. Today. Right now. And so is every man in this room who has been waiting on one. Director Friel. Sir, find out in the next 10 minutes every veteran in this building today waiting on a device, a prescription, a referral, or a benefit decision. I want a list. I want it on paper. I want it in my hand before I leave this lobby. Yes, sir. Marcus Friel almost ran out of the room. The secretary turned and looked for the first time at Crystal Mavers. Crystal had not moved. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her face had gone the color of paper. The secretary did not raise his voice. He walked the 7 steps to her window. He stopped in front of the glass. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand. What is your name? Crystal. Crystal Mavers. How long have you worked here, Crystal? 11 months, sir. And in 11 months, has anyone ever sat you down and told you what this building is for? She did not answer. This building is not a DMV. This building is not a fast food drive-thru. The people who walk through those doors gave the United States of America their 20s. Some of them gave more than that. The man behind me carried a 19-year-old kid through a jungle for 7 miles with that kid's blood on his shirt, and he did it because that is what he believed his country was. You understand what I am saying to you? Yes, sir. I do not think you do. But you are going to. He turned to the second man in the dark suit. I want her terminated by end of day. I want her badge collected before she leaves this lobby. I want a full review of every interaction she has had at this intake window for the last 11 months, and I want every veteran she touched to receive a personal phone call from this office with an apology and a status update on their case. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Crystal made a small choking sound. She started to cry. She started to say something about her son. She started to say something about her rent. The secretary held up a hand. The hand stopped her. Miss Mavers, I am very sorry for the situation you are now in. I want you to understand that the situation you are now in is a situation you built, one comment at a time, over 11 months, while men twice your age sat in plastic chairs and let you do it because they have spent 50 years being told their pain is paperwork. That ends today. In this building. In every building. He turned away from her window. He walked back to Frank Doyle. He offered Frank his arm. Frank Doyle, 78 years old, Vietnam, 2 tour, a Shao Valley, took the arm of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs of the United States, and together they walked, slow, careful, out of the green-carpeted lobby and down the corridor to a private office, while every veteran in that waiting room stood up, one by one, and applauded. The veteran with the prosthetic leg was the last to sit down. He was crying. He did not bother to hide it. In the private office, the secretary closed the door. He pulled out a chair for Frank. He sat across from him at a small wooden table. He poured 2 cups of water from a pitcher. For a long minute, neither one of them spoke. Then the secretary said, "I got your letter, Frank." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. Then I called my chief of staff, and I rearranged the entire week. Frank's hand was shaking again. He set the brown manila folder on the table. He set his hand on top of it. He did not open it yet. I did not write that letter to get you to come here, Jimmy. I wrote it because I am running out of time. And I needed to say it to somebody who would understand. You did not have to write a letter, Frank. You could have called the office. You could have called me directly. I did not have your number. I am the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Frank. Every veteran in America has my number. They do not feel like they do, son. That is the thing I was trying to tell you in the letter. The secretary looked down at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, his eyes were wet. Tell me what is in the folder, Frank. Frank took the rubber band off. He opened the folder. Inside were 3 things. A Bronze Star citation, a Silver Star citation, and a Distinguished Service Cross citation, signed by a general whose name Jimmy Reese knew by heart. The secretary stared at the third one. His mouth opened slightly. Frank, this was approved. It was approved in 1971. I never went to the ceremony. The letter sat in a box at my mother's house for 30 years. I found it when she died. Why did you not go to the ceremony? Because the man it was for did not come back from that valley, son. I came back. He did not. I did not feel right standing under lights for what he did. Frank, the citation is for you. You earned it. We earned it. The whole squad earned it. There is no name on a citation big enough to hold what those boys did. Putting my name on it alone felt like a lie. The secretary closed his eyes. He took a breath. All right, Sergeant. We are going to come back to this. But first, I want to know one thing. Why did you sit there this morning? Why did you let her talk to you that way? Frank smiled. It was a small, tired smile. The kind of smile that has carried a lot. Jimmy, I've been talked to that way my whole life. By drill sergeants who hated me. By officers who hated me. By people in airports in 1969 who hated me. By VA clerks for 50 years who did not hate me but did not see me. A girl with a phone is not the worst thing that has ever sat across a counter from me. I was not going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me angry. I was going to wait for my number. I was going to get my hearing aid. I was going to ride the bus home. And I was going to be grateful that I have a home and a bus to ride. The secretary did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "That is the problem, Frank. You should not have to be grateful for a bus." The story did not end in that office. In the next 48 hours, the secretary's team pulled every file on the Cleveland VA. Crystal Mavers was terminated by close of business that Tuesday. 3 other lobby staff were placed on administrative leave pending review. Marcus Friel resigned within 9 days. A federal inspector general investigation opened into wait times, complaint records, and what the report eventually called a culture of institutional contempt at the Cleveland facility. But that was not the part Frank remembered. The part Frank remembered was that the secretary stayed with him in that office until 2 in the afternoon. They ate sandwiches from the cafeteria. They looked at old photographs Frank had brought in the folder. They talked about boys who had names like Cobb and Mendez and Whitley, boys who never got old, boys whose mothers had outlived them by decades and gone to graves never knowing exactly what happened in a valley on the other side of the world. Frank got his hearing aid that afternoon. He was fitted by an audiologist who had been quietly told that her schedule was now clear for the rest of the day. The secretary sat in on the fitting. When Frank put the device in his ear and the audiologist clicked the program and Frank heard, for the first time in 2 years, the clear voice of another human being speaking directly to him, his eyes filled and he turned to the secretary and he said only, "There you are, Jimmy." The secretary laughed. He laughed and he cried at the same time, the way men do when something old finally sets itself down. Outside, the rain had stopped. The parking lot was wet and shining. 3 news vans had arrived at the front entrance. The secretary's staff offered to walk Frank out the back to avoid them. Frank shook his head. "I will walk out the front, son. With you. If that is all right." "It is more than all right, Sergeant." They walked out the front doors together. The cameras turned. The reporters shouted questions. Frank did not answer any of them. He just held the secretary's arm with one hand and his cane with the other, and he walked at his own pace down the sidewalk to the curb, where a black SUV was waiting now to take him home, the first ride home he had ever taken from that hospital that was not a city bus. In the weeks that followed, the Distinguished Service Cross citation that had sat in a box for 30 years was honored in a quiet ceremony at the same Cleveland VA. The lobby was repainted. The intake windows were rebuilt. A new policy was put in place across all VA facilities requiring lobby staff to complete a 40-hour module on the population they served, taught in part by veterans themselves. The veteran with the prosthetic leg, whose name was Anthony, became one of the volunteer instructors for that program. He had served 2 tours in Iraq. He told Frank, the first time they spoke at length, that watching Frank fold his hands and wait in that lobby was the single most disciplined act of restraint he had ever seen, and that he had carried it with him ever since. Frank just shook his head. "It was not restraint, son. I was just tired. Tired men do not fight back. We just keep going." A year later, Frank Doyle was found one morning at his kitchen table, head down on the newspaper, a cup of cold coffee beside him. He had passed in his sleep. The doctors said it was his heart. The folder of citations was on the table beside the coffee, open to the Distinguished Service Cross. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs flew to Cleveland for the funeral. He stood at the graveside in a gray suit, and when the rifle volley fired and the bugle began to play taps, he came to attention one last time and held his salute until the last note had finished. Anthony was there. Denise was there. 20 veterans from the lobby that Tuesday were there. They had all gotten the call. The rain had not started yet that morning. The sky was the kind of pale Ohio gray that does not promise anything either way. The flag came off the casket folded 13 times into a tight triangle, and the honor guard placed it not into the hands of the secretary, who would have taken it, but into the hands of an old high school friend of Frank's who was the only family Frank had left. The friend held the flag against his chest. He cried once hard one sound and then stopped. The secretary walked over to him after. He did not say much. He just put a hand on the man's shoulder and stood there for a moment with him in the gray light. Then he walked back to the car, slow, the way a man walks who has spent a morning carrying somebody home for the last time. Inside the SUV, before it pulled away, he sat very still for a minute and looked out the window at the line of veterans still standing at the gravesite, hats off, hands folded, in no hurry to leave. He said soft to nobody, "We owed you, Sergeant. We will keep owing you. And we will try to do better." Then the SUV pulled away from the cemetery, and the road took them back out into the long, pale Ohio morning, and somewhere behind them, in a green-carpeted lobby that was now painted a different color, the next old man in a wet jacket was already taking a number and sitting down, slow, careful, hands on a cane, waiting his turn. And this time, the woman behind the glass stood up when he came in.